Joining me now to discuss these issues from Tunisia is Zainab Al-Suwaij. She is the co-founder and executive director of the American Islamic Congress. Raised in Iraq, she fled the country in 1991 after being involved in an uprising against Saddam Hussein. Also with me in studio, Mame Khady Diouf. Originally from Senegal, she's with the Africa program at the U.S.-based think tank Woodrow Wilson Center, and I want to thank both of you for being on the broadcast. Mom, why don't I start with you? The economy in sub-Saharan Africa, from Ethiopia, Nigeria, all the way down to South Africa, it's booming.
Definitely.
And yet, when it comes to women's rights, it seems like things are still kind of stuck in years gone by. Why is that?
Definitely. I think that, with the economies booming across the continent, women's rights have slowly, come up. I would say that governments have not invested enough, at least. There has been progress when it comes to women's rights in sub-Saharan Africa, but I think governments need to definitely invest more in legal reforms, education, women's empowerment when it comes to the economy, as we were just talking about, to move that forward. There are definitely traditional and cultural issues that need to be also dealt with, sensitizing the communities. When it comes to women's rights, for example, in terms of inheritance and other things that definitely need to be
we got a lot of ground to cover, both in terms of terrain and subject matter. Zainab, why don't I throw a question in your direction? You're there in Tunisia, which is the birthplace of the Arab Spring, and yet last year this case very celebrated, a 27-year-old woman who was raped. 3 officers were charged with it, but she also faced charges of indecency and could have ended up in jail for 6 months. It created quite an outcry there in Tunisia. The case was eventually, the case against her was dropped. But what does that say about how far things have come in Tunisia, and is there anything to be read into that as far as women's rights there in the birthplace of the Arab Spring?
Sure. Certainly the situation have been changed for women in Tunisia in particular, especially before women, they used to enjoy equal rights in the country, and also the family status law. It was very advanced among the Arab countries or the region of North Africa in general. Unfortunately, the situation have changed after the revolution, specifically for women and women's rights. Now, many of the women activists here in the country are afraid that they are losing the rights that they have already been granted during Bourguiba's time, or Bourguiba's government, which is even before Ben Ali's. So there is this kind of fear, there is this kind of, we see a lot of incidents that women have been subject to and target to violence, target to humiliation, and stripping their rights from them. So this is unfortunately a situation that the women did not really wanted, nor they are looking forward to have any kind of decrease in rights. And also they are very worried about international treaties such as CEDAW and many other treaties that keep equality in terms of gender.
Let me jump in here for just a second, because we mentioned in the introduction that in 1991 you were involved in the uprising against Saddam Hussein. Women during the Arab Spring really distinguished themselves with a great deal of courage. They were out front, very visible. And yet, even in Egypt, the parliamentary election, less than 2% of the women ended up in the parliament. So I think that in some respects, some of the women might feel as though they've become marginalized or second-class citizens. What is the sentiment, would you say?
Well, unfortunately, this kind of things happened. Women were in the front line, especially when the revolution or the Arab Spring happened. Women were there fighting. They were in the squares. They were targeted and subject to being shot by the government and so on and so forth. But when after the revolution, and when it's time to have place in the government, women being neglected. This is the case also, and as you mentioned, in Egypt, in Tunisia, also Libya, and many other places. But in Tunisia here they have the equal rights, so kept the status of women almost equal in the parliament. But unfortunately, in many other countries did not. Of course, this is a very disappointing factor for women and women's rights, and they are afraid that the situation is going to get worse rather than better.
Let's talk about the African continent. Are women making strides politically there?
Definitely, I think so, and I totally agree with Zainab has said in terms of having women at the political and the decision-making table, period. There definitely has been progress across sub-Saharan Africa, but there needs to be more needs to be done, basically. For example, I'll just go, as you said, I'm originally from Senegal, where during the elections last year, 40% of women were elected as parliamentarians, but it was because of quotas. So basically, these quotas had to be, had to be put in place so that women, parties would put women on their lists, and that they would be elected. So as I said, a lot more needs to be done, and women are supposed to be seen as a full part of society.
What about the Democratic Republic of Congo? There's so much being reported about rape as a weapon of war. We know what happened in Rwanda. Talk to me about how prevalent that is in the continent, and what can be done to stop it?
Definitely, it is prevalent. Depending on the countries, of course, we have to take it case by case. But rape as a weapon of war is definitely used as a military means to humiliate and degrade women, of course, and affect the community as a whole. So in societies where there is conflict, where the governments are not functioning and have no way of controlling these issues, and where some of the national armies officers are perpetrating these crimes, it's definitely rampant, I would say.
Zainab, if you can, just briefly, I wanted to get your thoughts on Amina Falali, this 16-year-old girl in Morocco who drank poison, killed herself because she was forced to marry this rapist who beat her. And this happens in a lot of these countries as well, where the rapist is given the option, if they marry the woman, then they don't have to go to prison. What about cases like that, and what can be done about that?
There are a lot of violations and cases like this in the Arab world and the Muslim world, unfortunately. Women being forced to marry their rapist because of, there are certain layers of whether it's being shameful of, the sin that he's committed, not like he is necessarily regretting what he have done, but to get away from the sentence, the jail sentence, or the punishment. Not necessarily these women wanted to marry this person as well, but they've been forced because it's considered shameful to the family and family's owner to have a woman being raped by a man, even though she doesn't have anything to do with it. These kind of cases, this is one, and you have the honor killing cases as well. You have cases of female genital mutilation, and these kind of things widely spread in many, like especially the female genital mutilation is very widely spread in Africa. And
well, let me get Mom to jump in on that subject, because I do want to talk to you about that as well. That seems to be something that's getting a lot of attention from the media of late. How prevalent is that, and what can be done to stop that?
It is definitely prevalent across the continent in certain countries, and I would say that it's traditional. Communities do female genital mutilation or cutting because in their mind they are that's something that they are supposed to do, that's been passed from generation to generation.
How do you change that patriarchal society?
Some things have been done, basically. There is this organization that's called Tostan that's based in Senegal, and they work with communities in Senegal in sensitizing them. Basically they have a human rights curriculum that they work on with the communities and impart them with different basically get them to the table to talk about these issues and ask them to renounce these practices. So there's been a lot of success actually in Senegal and Burkina Faso, where these communities have actually understand why female genital mutilation or cutting is not good, and they've done something about it in talking to the male leaders and the community in abandoning these practices.
Well, let me briefly again, if you can, because this is something that we also touched on, this teenage girl in Morocco. But But preteen girls in some countries in the African continent are also forced to marry older men. What can be done about that?
I think it's education. It's all about education, and also governments being able, and communities, excuse me, being able to actually talk about these issues and raising these issues and bringing them to the forefront and saying publicly that they are against it. As you said, a lot of young girls are being married off, because their families believe that, they should be married off. That's the thing to do, and also because of poverty issues, etc., and etc. But I think, as I said, it's about sensitization, it's about education, and about saying that, a girl is as, good as a boy, and that they are all full members of society, and that we need to consider them as such.
Zainab, I want to touch on Saudi briefly as well. Women can't drive there. They can't go out on their own. They're limited in the professions that they can go into. Why is it lagging so far behind, and is there anything that can be done to turn that around?
So the situation in Saudi Arabia is totally different, because there are several layers of boundaries: religious boundaries, cultural boundaries, and government boundaries. And it's all of it emphasized on women and how to oppress women in the society. Unfortunately, the religious authorities there try to put more and more pressure and not let women have their rights. We've seen a little bit of changes, but it's going to be a while before we see the rest of it happening anytime soon.
Zainab, thank you for joining us from Tunisia. Mom, thanks so much for stopping by our studio here in Washington, D.C. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.